print offered by Mr. Fitzgerald. Page 6, line 2, strike
The amendment is considered as read.
I withdraw my point of order.
Point of order is withdrawn. The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes to explain his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry about the confusion. We all agree that the current immigration system is broken, but this bill to grant amnesty to millions of illegal immigrants is grossly irresponsible and will serve to further inflame the already dire situation at the border. As of March, nearly 48,000 unaccompanied children had crossed the border into the United States in 2021, a 163% increase from the year prior. Myself, many of my colleagues have seen this disaster firsthand as we have visited the border. We're all aware that it is not uncommon for criminals to use our southern border to traffic women and children in and out of the country. Mr. Chairman, my amendment will prevent individuals who have been convicted of sex offenses from receiving lawful permanent resident status. Every 68 seconds, an American is sexually assaulted, and every 9 minutes, that victim is a child. Just as horrifying is the fact that less than 3% of perpetrators end up in prison. While most criminals convicted of sex offenses may serve sentences that may make them ineligible for amnesty under this bill, those with slightly less heinous offenses may find their way to low-level facilities due to massive overcrowding or changes in state and federal sentencing guidelines for certain drug crimes. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment to ensure legal immigrants who commit these horrible crimes are not rewarded with legal status, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlelady from California seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, as has been mentioned before, the matter before us is primarily a budget matter, and if we are able to move forward, we are going to unleash growth and job growth and economic prosperity considerably. And these various amendments really are diverting us from that major objective, which is to move this policy matter for budget reasons. Having said that, the gentleman's amendment is entirely unnecessary. It is completely covered by the grounds of admissibility, inadmissibility in the Immigration and Nationality Act. I share the gentleman's belief that sexual predators should not be given visas or admitted to the United States, which is why I support the prohibition in the Immigration and Nationality Act. We didn't copy Section 212 of the Immigration Act and put it in the underlying bill. That's existing law. It doesn't need to be repeated in order to become law. It's part of the law right now. So the amendment is completely unnecessary. It's a diversion from our primary goal, which is to get these budget measures adopted as soon as possible and get the economic benefit that we seek for our country. And I urge a no vote, and I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. Who seeks recognition?
Mr. Chairman.
For what purpose does Mr. Jordan seek recognition?
Strike the last word, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you,
for
Mr.
5
Chairman.
minutes.
Just want to respond to the subcommittee chair from California. If the Democrats don't want to debate immigration policy in a reconciliation markup, then don't put immigration policy in a reconciliation bill. I mean, this is mostly about, but well, you're the ones who put all the immigration policy. You're the one who's trying to give amnesty to 8 million people. So the idea that we can't debate that that makes absolutely no sense. And then the double standard is just driving me nuts. The last amendment offered on Americans' Second Amendment liberties, or on, firearm offenses. I'm just reminded, I know we spent last Congress, the Democrats passed this red flag law, which said you could take a firearm from an American citizen if someone thought they might be a threat, didn't do anything wrong, they thought they might be a threat. Someone could go to government, go to the police, go to a court, and they would take that firearm from that individual, and that individual who's losing their right to their Second Amendment liberties wasn't even allowed to be at the proceeding. So you're willing to do that for citizens, but you can't say, some illegal immigrant who has a firearms offense we're not gonna say that prohibits them from getting amnesty. I fail to see that. That makes absolutely no sense. So the contradictions are just starting to pile up. Again, if Democrats don't want to debate immigration policy in a reconciliation markup, don't put amnesty, don't put immigration policy in a reconciliation bill.
Will the gentleman yield?
Be happy to yield.
I just want to echo what Mr. Jordan just said. You all are, the Democrats are the ones that brought this issue to the table today. It doesn't belong here, but since it's teed up, we have to object. The idea that it is some sort of superfluous matter that we should waive off, that we're going to allow sex offenders into the country to give them green cards, is outrageous. And I'm telling you that the people of my district and my state do not want this. They will not stand for it. And the idea that we should wave a wand here, oh, you all just settle down. Republicans, please just be quiet. Let us get done with our budget matter here. That's all we want to do. These other things, let's just forget about this. We will not forget about it because the American people sent us here to fight for their freedoms, to fight for their rights, their sovereignty, their security. And bringing in sex offenders from 150 some odd countries over this border that's been opened up by the Biden administration is an outrageous thing that every member of this committee should be fighting against. And I cannot believe that the Democrats are trying to wave this off as this is some sort of little matter. I yield back.
Yield to the gentleman
The gentleman yields back. I recognize.
No, he's yield back to me. I yield to the gentleman from California, the ranking member of the subcommittee.
Thank the gentleman for yielding. I just feel it important to point out, and we'll be discussing this more with Mr. Biggs' amendment, but Section 212A2 of this language allows the criminal grounds for inadmissibility to be waived by the DHS secretary on whim. Now, the provisions are laughable to begin with. 2 misdemeanors don't disqualify you from being admitted. I don't think there's anybody here in this room that's been convicted of 2 misdemeanors. This is not exactly Rotary Club material we're talking about. But even that, all of that can be waived by the Secretary of Homeland Security. So this is a farce. We all know the objective of the Democrats, that is to leave our borders wide open. And at some point, the American people have got to say either enough or give up their country. And I yield back.
I yield to the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Buck.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I'll be brief. I just find it incredible that the majority is not giving us an opportunity to debate whether including these immigration provisions in a reconciliation bill is germane. And at the same time, they're telling us that we should not discuss the immigration proposals in this bill. It is absolutely not germane to reconciliation, and it is absolutely an important discussion that we have. If we're giving 8 million people amnesty, I think the American people need to know that, and I think the American people need to hear this debate, and I yield to my friend from Ohio.
I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Does anyone else seek recognition? Mr. Roy. For what purposes does Mr. Roy seek recognition?
Strike the last word.
Gentleman's recognized.
I thank the chair. I'd like to associate myself with the comments of my colleagues on my side of the aisle that have been pointing out the reality of what we're dealing with here. I do find it extraordinary that the gentlelady from California tries to say that this is all about creating significant amount of economic growth and activity by what? Spending another $107 billion. We still don't know how it will be spent, by the way. That's what we're allegedly discussing here. The American people say, well, what do you do? Like, what is it you're doing as a member of Congress? Well, we're having this discussion about spending money we do not have. Spending money that is going to continue to drive up debt and decrease our financial stability. But put that aside, fine. My Democratic colleagues will say, well, no, we paid for this with certain tax increases. You don't really want to talk about them being tax increases on the vast majority of the American people. You don't want to talk about the trillions in tax increases that are going to destroy economic growth, take away farms, take away small businesses that they want to pass down to their kids after a lifetime of hard work because you want to increase the capital gains tax in ways that will hurt the American people and destroy economic activity. You don't want to talk about the fact that you were paying people not to work for the last year and a half, and now small businesses are getting cratered and shut down because they can't hire people. You got tons of people out there saying, oh, we can't get a job, right? Or I don't have a job. You got tons of people over here saying, well, we want to hire somebody. Where do you think the government's meddling is in all of that? And so we want to talk about economic activity, but what do you insert in the bill? But amnesty. And then you say, well, that's for economic growth. But, oh, we can't talk about rules that we should say that maybe should be put in place to make sure we have a secure border or to ensure that the people that come here aren't criminals. And you say, well, we're catching people at the border. And so, yeah, you've got all these 50 murderers and these 450 rapists that Border Patrol has caught. But you don't want to sit here and discuss the gotaways? Why not? Do you accept the fact that there's been 9,500, almost 10,000 pounds of fentanyl that have come into our country? The amount of the last 3 years combined, and the year's not over yet. Do you accept this fact that Texas Department of Public Safety caught 10 pounds of fentanyl last year and over 100 pounds in the first 4 months of this year? Do you want to have that conversation? Oh, say no, Mr. Roy. This is a conversation about the Judiciary Committee and all of this great economic benefit we're going to get out of spending $107 billion under something that is allegedly under the jurisdiction of the Judiciary Committee. But don't talk about the actual border issues affecting Texans, affecting Americans, dead Americans from opioid overdoses, dead Americans from illegals coming across who are murderers, ranchers whose fences are cut wide open, families having to arm their children to go out on their ranches. Yes, just talked to ranchers last week. No one here seems to care about that. And we offered an amendment saying, hey, can we just codify, for the record, we don't want gang members or, in this case, rapists to be granted citizenship or status. No, we can't have that debate because, oh, this isn't appropriate. We got to keep spending money we don't have in the infinite wisdom of Democrats who believe no job was ever created without government spending a bunch of money to fund bureaucrats to take away our liberty. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Who else seeks recognition? For what purposes does Mr. Tiffany seek recognition?
Move to strike the last word.
Gentleman's recognized.
So I have to go back for just a second to this whole germaneness question of a couple questions ago. And I just find it really interesting as I've had a chance to think about this, the sleight of hand that went on through that period when the parliamentarian could rule on the representative from Wisconsin's amendment, which parliamentarian said that's policy, but the parliamentarian can't rule on what is policy clearly in what is happening before us today, policy in regards to allowing nearly 10 million people to have citizenship in this country, even though they came into this country illegally. Mr. Chairman, you've got a bit of a kangaroo court here, I think.
Would the gentleman
But to this amendment, we are seeing stories that are coming out of Afghanistan in regards to child brides. And it's not an uncommon thing. They saw it in the mass migration in Europe. And we're hearing stories about that as people are rushed out of Afghanistan. Remember what the State Department said a few weeks ago? They said, get them on the planes and out of here. We will deal with the immigration status later. Ready, fire, aim. That's what this administration has been doing. And that is why this amendment is so important to make sure people register as sex offenders, because that may be happening. We know it's happening down on the southern border because we know what the cartels are doing. And the same thing may be happening with this mass evacuation that's coming out of Afghanistan based on the stories we've heard from mainstream media sources. This is an important amendment. I hope we adopt it, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman yields back. Does anyone else seek recognition on this amendment? In that case, the question occurs on the amendment. All in favor say aye. Opposed, no. No.
No.
The noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. Any further?
Roll call.
The roll call is requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Nadler?
No.
Mr. Nadler votes no. Ms. Lofgren? Ms. Lofgren votes no. Ms. Jackson-Lee?
No.
Ms. Jackson-Lee votes no. Mr. Cohen?
No.
Mr. Cohen votes no. Mr. Johnson of Georgia.
No.
Mr. Johnson of Georgia votes no. Mr. Deutsch.
No.
Mr. Deutsch votes no. Ms. Bass.
No.
Ms. Bass votes no. Mr. Jeffries.
No.
Mr. Jeffries votes no. Mr. Cicilline.
No.
Mr. Cicilline votes no. Mr. Swalwell.
No.
Mr. Swalwell votes no. Mr. Liu. Mr. Raskin.
No.
Mr. Raskin votes no. Ms. Jayapal.
No.
Ms. Jayapal votes no. Ms. Dimmings.
No.
Ms. Dimmings votes no. Mr. Correa.
No.
Mr. Correa votes no. Ms. Scanlon. Ms. Scanlon votes no. Ms. Garcia.
No.
Ms. Garcia votes no. Mr. Neguse.
No.
Mr. Neguse votes no. Ms. McBath.
No.
Ms. McBath votes no. Mr. Stanton.
No.
Mr. Stanton votes no. Ms. Dean.
No.
Ms. Dean votes no. Ms. Escobar.
No.
Ms. Escobar votes no. Mr. Jones.
No.
Mr. Jones votes no. Ms. Ross.
Ross votes no.
Ms. Ross votes no. Ms. Bush.
Bush votes no.
Ms. Bush votes no. Mr. Jordan.
Yes.
Mr. Jordan votes yes. Mr. Shabbat. Mr. Gomert.
Yes.
Mr. Gomert votes yes. Mr. Issa.
Yes.
Mr. Issa votes yes. Mr. Buck.
Aye.
Mr. Buck votes aye. Mr. Gates.
Aye.
Mr. Gates votes aye. Mr. Johnson of Louisiana. Mr. Johnson of Louisiana votes aye. Mr. Biggs. Mr. Biggs votes aye. Mr. McClintock.
Aye.
Mr. McClintock votes aye. Mr. Stubbe.
Yes.
Mr. Stubbe votes yes. Mr. Tiffany.
Aye.
Mr. Tiffany votes aye. Mr. Massey.
Aye.
Mr. Massey votes aye. Mr. Roy.
Aye.
Mr. Roy votes aye. Mr. Bishop. Mr. Bishop votes aye. Ms. Fishbach.
Aye.
Ms. Fishbach votes aye. Ms. Spartz.
Yes.
Ms. Spartz votes yes. Mr. Fitzgerald.
Aye.
Mr. Fitzgerald votes aye. Mr. Benz.
Yes.
Mr. Benz votes yes. Mr. Owens. Aye. Mr. Owens votes aye.
How am I recorded?
Mr. Liu, you're not recorded.
I vote no.
Mr. Liu votes no.
Are there any other members who wish to be recorded who haven't been recorded? The clerk will report.
Put it.
Ms. Jackson Lee, you were recorded as no.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, there are 18 ayes and 25 noes.
The amendment is not agreed to. Are there any further amendments to the amendment in the nature of a substitute?
Mr. Chairman,
What purpose does Mr. Johnson seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report the amendment. Point of order is reserved.